how do you write a methodology section? What needs to be included here?
Yeah, and so and I've kind of prefigured this a little bit, like pre-gamed it for you, so you have a little bit of a clue in advance. And again, the reason we're sort of zeroing in on the literature review and methodology is partly because they are the most common across all disciplines, but also it's the part that can be done the most poorly if we don't step back and think about it really concretely. So the methodology section, whether it's a shorter part for a master's thesis or longer in a PhD dissertation, this is where you can be a bit meta. So you can say something about the field in which you work. And again, what you are demonstrating is that you understand the rules of the game as they apply to your field. So for instance, a scholar in a biochemical field will do research very differently than a legal scholar. And they will both do research very differently than a historian. Or a political theorist, or a political studies researcher. And so again, political studies, political theory, they're different fields. So again, being able to step back for a moment and speak about your field is really important. And that situates so if the literature review is here's what other people have said, this is how I'm going to do and produce the research that the rest of my analysis will display for you. And so you need to know the jargon and the vocabulary of your field and use it properly here. So are you collecting data from live samples? Are you conducting interviews with human participants? Are you engaged in personal or ethnographic research? Is your work highly theoretical? Are you doing policy-driven investigative work? Are you providing historical work? Is your work looking at archival and material documents? Are you engaged in experiments in a lab? Are you working on something through a variety of case studies? Are you combining case studies with a theoretical approach? Are you providing policy analysis and recommendations? So those are all examples of different methodological approaches that you might want to lay out for your reader. And the only person who's going to know your field is you, but you need to be very precise in outlining how you do what you do. And a very typical question at most PhD defenses is a question to talk about your methodology. Why did you choose this methodology? What are the strengths and the weaknesses of this methodology? Where are there potential gaps or things that were out of scope? So being able to think about that and articulate those questions at the beginning of your thesis or dissertation project gets you in the exact right headspace that you're going to need to be when you get to the defense of your overall project. But again, it also helps you to articulate the scope. This is my methodological approach. This is what's in scope. This is what's out of scope. These are the gaps, So for instance, certain kinds of research, you can't control all of the variables. So in your methodological approach, you will identify where the inability to control for all of those variables can lead to some statistically significant questions about how precise the data is at the end of the day. And you want to be upfront about that and show, okay, so we know that there's this potential risk. We're still able to draw these kinds of conclusions. Similarly, again, if you're doing a case analysis and then extrapolating that out to more general insights, you'll want to identify and say, okay, well, we've done this case analysis, so it gestures towards broad conclusions, but there are limits that we would need to expand a little bit further on. So those are some examples of the ways in which you can jump into the methodology section. And if you will permit me, this is where I will jump in. Joellen asked me at the beginning to talk about my own journey from being a professor to being a chief operating officer. And so that again had me from being a professor, creating EssayJack, and now into WiseWriter. So you can see WiseWriter at the top, and any of you can sign up, and it's free, and you can use it to your heart's content. And again, if you already have an EssayJack account previously, so maybe you've discovered EssayJack before the acquisition, you can still log into your account. We haven't closed it down in its entirety yet, so EssayJack still exists. Thank you. Yes, I am already signed in. So Essay Jack still exists, and you can play around with the essay writing platform that it used to be. But from WiseWriter as well, this is where you can start writing for free in the WiseWriter platform. You can create your free account. And so what I want to do here is jump in so that I can show you a little bit about that literature review and that methodology section, so you can see things a little bit in practice. So let's just say, my dissertation is going to be what I start writing. There are all of these templates in place. The advanced academic essay, so the most advanced academic essay is a dissertation or a thesis. So we'll go in and create that. I'll make this a little bit bigger.
Smaller. There we go.
There we go. Want it to be bigger, not smaller. So again, this is our introduction, body, and conclusion. Again, the topic, background, thesis statement. So again, topic, we've talked about that. Background, we've talked about. But now this is where we can start to provide that literature review. So the initial background is that setting the stage, but then there's extended background. And let's see, I'll close this so we can see everything. So what is extended background? An extended background is in some ways that literature review. So it gives more details and context, usually involving references to outside sources. So what are the important historical or scholarly details that speak directly to your point? And so again, this is where you can start to build up that literature review. So we've got sentence starters here. So, the major participants in this debate are. So in the example, when I was talking about the literature review, I was saying, you may have X and Y, and that's how you've categorized. It may be that there is an ongoing debate in the field. And so I'm going to spell out, who these scholars are who are debating about something that I'm entering into as a scholar in the field. And then as you go on, you can add more and more evidence and explanation. And this is how you build up that literature review. So this first evidence is going to be, an example to analyze is blah, blah, blah. And that's the first kind of quotation, the first position that I'm bringing to bear from this literature review. And then I'm going to explain that literature review, how it shows so-and-so is part of one side of the debate. So, plausible interpretation of the above is that so-and-so is on one side of the debate. And we can add more evidence and have another quotation from somebody on the other side of the debate. So again, as we go along, I'll show you that we can sort of preview as we start to write that literature review section. You can kind of build in all of those component parts. And once again, there's tips and prompts and questions that you can kind of use to explain as you layer in those component parts for the literature review. So again, what you're trying to do and write the literature review is technically it's a summary of the research, but it has to do more than just be a list or a summary. It has to be the research that you've then categorized in some way that makes sense for your scholarship. And then the second part that I said is worth paying attention to a little bit more closely is that methodology section. So once you've provided your thesis statement or your problem statement, you can have the approach or method. So again, what is approach or method? States what field you're working in and how you plan to make your argument within that field. So the how is the most important. So again, we have some examples, compare and contrast, case analysis, whatever it is, how you're going to build up your methodology section. Once again, we've got sentence starters that help you to get started thinking about methodological questions. So my methodology is, that's a simple one. You can then say, okay, my methodology is lab work. And then you spell that out in detail. My work is informed by, and then there may be some giants in the field, some scholars who are a towering influence for you. And again, you'll want to characterize what that work is. This essay or this dissertation is built upon the foundations of critical legal scholarship. And then you kind of have to go through and explain what those tenets of critical legal scholarship may be. This analysis draws resources from literary analysis. So I'm going to draw resources from certain kinds of literary analysis, particularly, let's say, Marxist criticism. And then I am going to outline each of those. The theoretical framework is based upon, I'm going to outline what is the model, that theoretical model that underpins my research. Again, critical resources informing this approach have been influenced by, these are the kinds of sentences that you need to get yourself starting to think about the how. What is the methodological how of what you do? The argument proceeds within the discipline of religious studies, within the discipline of medical microbiology, whatever your field is, you want to be very specific. Again, the paradigm within which I operate, this argument grows out of a tradition. The character of my analysis is descriptive, prescriptive, theoretical, empirical. So these are all examples to help you think about talking about your methodological approach in a very distanced way. So sometimes what the challenge is in starting a dissertation or a thesis is we're so close to the research. We are in our own particular puzzle, and it's hard to step back for a moment and say, okay, well, how does my small little piece of this puzzle actually fit within the field as a whole? And so both the literature review and the methodological sections are opportunities for you to demonstrate that even though the rest of your thesis and dissertation is going to get into the minute details of your small thing, but that you are situating that small thing, that smaller contribution that you're making into the field as a whole. So that's kind of how it all goes together from that literature review and methodological section, which are core components to any thesis or dissertation.
Perfect. I think it's so important for us to go through all of these pieces because, again, using a tool like this allows you to teach yourself. It's not just simply getting the work done. You're actually learning. It's a hands-on learning process. So you become a better thinker, you become a better researcher, and you most definitely become a better writer. And what you can also do when you're looking at this in the backwards, before you're going on to an editor, is you can kind of self-edit in terms of what did I include, what did I omit, and it will have blank spaces there. And that's really, really great. So when your editor comes in and they're, you've gotten these things, their questions are going to be specific enough that you can fill in the pieces that you may not have seen. Again, you're in the woods, you can't see the trees, but you definitely know what you've done. You've got it organized in a manner. So now we can have a conversation about what you're proposing as opposed to what are you trying to say?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's so key because if you can get these structural elements right or right enough, obviously everything is subject to refinement, but if you can get these structural elements right enough, then the help you can get from an editor, the help you can get from your supervisor or committee or other colleagues is going to be so much more valuable because then you can even speak and say, like, I'm really struggling with my methodology section. Here's, my draft of my methodology section. Does it make sense? Do you understand? And then an editor is going to be able to provide meaningful feedback, both at the content level as well as at the sort of grammar, spelling, punctuation, stylistic level, knowing, oh, okay, this is the methodology section. As a sample reader, as an editor, in reading this, do I now understand enough about your field? And that can be really helpful. Whereas if you just kind of like, here's my introduction or here's my entire dissertation, now edit it for me, that can be a really hard task on the part of the person on the other end who's now jumping in and providing you with that help. So being able to understand the component parts and then get help on the component parts along the way is a really smart way of tackling a large project, particularly a PhD dissertation.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And it's really great to, that's an understatement, but, to be able to start there with a tool that kind of walks you through, teaches you how to think, how to organize, how to put it together, and then having that as your foundation of, where your conversations start, having, an understanding of what the sections, as we've spoken about, really, really does help you so much because you're going to be putting down quite a bit of an investment for, editing. And of course, because you're getting a PhD person who not only understands what you're writing about, but understands what your review team and your committee are looking for. And
Yeah.
that's so important that they know, how to fill in those blocks. So you're not both going in going, hoping it's going to work. You've got somebody on your team who says, no, you're missing this section. And I guarantee you, if you don't put this in, you're not going to get approved.
Yes.
So having those there, it's all coming around. And I mean, these tools are so amazing because this is new. This is so new out there. And it just makes it easier and better. And the competition is hard. It's really hard. So use the tools that are available, very affordable, to make the best impressions and to take away some of the stress, and allows you, especially if you're going to PhD, it's not your first time at the rodeo. You're going to be doing a lot of this. So keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, it's sort of the affordable, as in this year, especially for Wise Writer, you can access it and play around for free. So nothing more affordable than free. And then, as you say, Joelle, the technologies out there are relatively new. I mean, back in the day when I started both my master's and then subsequently my PhD, like the way that I kind of had to figure out what these research papers looked like was just by literally going to the library and checking out previous master's and PhD work and kind of reading and trying to decode what it was that other people who had been successful had done. And that was a lot of kind of then backwards construction to try to figure out what they had done and then create something that I could apply to my own work. Whereas that work that I did back in the day has now found its new life in the technology. So you don't have to go to the library and read, sort of every single dissertation or master's thesis in the field before you even start writing your own.
Exactly. So, I mean, my advice is, to use the tools that help you the best. And when you're going into the fundamentals of thesis writing, you really, really to have kind of a templated format that allows you to go in and to also get these stimulants, what should I put here? How do I want to present this? It just makes it easier, and you're using the correct language. And I cannot emphasize enough, if it's English as a second language, which many, many students are, this just takes so much stress off. It's going to help you understand what your editor is referring to, methodology and things like that. You really, really need to zone in so that you can focus on what you do well, which is your subject matter. Stick to the subject matter. Unfortunately, you can be super smart, but if you can't convey that logically and concisely within your writing, it won't matter. So this is necessary. It's just the way it is. But having this tool, fantastic. Absolutely cannot express enough how much we appreciate it as editors, because now we can look at it from the, not just the grammar, spelling, punctuation, but okay, what is the overall structure and how are you developing this and how are you supporting your statements, and and then we can go into your citations, your references, and that too, and just make sure it's all right and that any mistakes are caught before you go into submission stage. So it's very important.